Kirsten Fox, our next speaker, brings a unique voice to the discussion of resilience, which, to remind you, is by definition the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness, the ability of an object to spring back into shape. After a plane crash, 2 divorces, a child with cancer, her own cancer, and her mother with dementia living with her during her final weeks of life, Kirsten Fox credits 5 tools and a supply of good wine with her survival. I don't know if it's a supply of good wine or a good supply of wine. In her speech, Resilience, 5 Tools to Get You Back on Track, Kirsten shares the secret she uses to swing her feet out of bed each morning when life smacks her upside the head. Sit back and enjoy this humorously sage advice from a woman who has truly been through it all, Kirsten Fox.
Thanks, Suzanne. Hello. Before I get started, I want to set my talk in perspective. I am not up here because I've won some resilience competition. I don't think that what I've been facing in my life is any worse than you or you or you. In fact, if this was a competition, we would all lose because a guy named Joe Simpson would win. Now, if you don't know who Joe Simpson is, you might want to take a look at the movie Touching the Void. I'll give you a little brief synopsis. So Joe and his buddy Simon Yates go down to Peru to climb a 21,000-foot peak. And it had never been summited before. So they summit it in 3 days. And they're coming down the mountain, and a blizzard hits. And Joe falls and breaks his leg. They devise a system where Simon is lowering Joe 300 feet, which is the amount of rope they had, and then descending to meet Joe where he is. And it's going passably well until Joe reaches a sheet of ice, falls, and goes off an edge of a cliff and is hanging in a crevasse at the end of the rope with no way to climb up. Simon's up on the mountain, and he is holding the rope and he's being pulled down, not knowing what has happened to his friend. And because they can't talk because it's wind and snow, and this goes on for a couple hours, and then Simon has to make the agonizing decision to cut the rope so that one of them can survive. Joe's assumed dead, of course, but he's not dead. He's fallen down into the crevasse and landed on a ledge. And the movie follows his solitary journey as he drags and hops himself the miles out of the crevasse and back to base camp, hopefully before Simon packs up and leaves. Now, spoiler alert, he does make it out. And he credits his survival, much of his survival, with having a wristwatch. Because what he said is his overall goal of survival was so big, he couldn't possibly get his head around it. But he had a timer on his wristwatch, and he would set a goal every 20 minutes for getting to the next rock or the next outcropping, and he would drag himself there. A point the movie makes so well, this breaking a large goal into smaller goals, that I should assign it as homework for you for resilience training. So I'm not here because I've won some resilience competition. I've got some great stories to share, but Joe won. Enough said. So let me explain where the birth of this talk came from. My friend Kathleen Barlow is president of the Women's Business Network here in Park City. And earlier this year in the spring, she decided to change the format of the meetings, the monthly meetings, from basically a happy hour with a business card exchange to women connecting authentically. With that, she needed volunteers to speak each month about personal topics, love, spirituality, grief, resilience. So she very kindly nominated me to do the resilience speech in September, and I said, of course, I would do it. I totally forgot about it at that point because this was the spring. So by the time September rolled around, I had had my mom with dementia living with me she'd moved in the summer. She'd passed away August 29th in my house. My sisters had basically emotionally melted, and I was the person that had to pick up the pieces. I had to call all my mom's friends. I had to write the obituary, clean out her apartment in San Diego, and organize her memorial service for a couple weeks later in La Jolla. All while one of my companies, Fox School of Wine, was executing double the number of events in that 6-week period that we'd done in the entire previous year. I remember on Monday, August 27th, my mom is in a hospital bed in the living room, and she's sleeping quietly. It's about 8:30 at night, and I was going to rest. I was so tired, and it was about 8:30 at night, and I went over to the couch to lay down, and I tucked myself in under the comforter that was there, and my dog came up, Roxy came up, and licked my hand. And suddenly I realized I hadn't fed her, I hadn't walked her, I hadn't probably even let her out to go to the bathroom all day. And I lost it. I started sobbing and crying and jabbering on. And I went up to my mom's hospital bed and I said, Mom, I have a huge day tomorrow. I am executing 2 simultaneous corporate events and I'm freaking out. I said, either you need to die right now or you need to wait till Wednesday, because I can't get a call in the middle of the day tomorrow or a text that you've passed. And I waited. And she took a breath. And I said, all right, then we have a deal. And God bless her, she waited till Wednesday. So then I remembered I have to make this speech, right? One of my friends, Renee Bodley, said, well, gosh, Kirsten, by volunteering to speak about resilience, weren't you kind of daring the universe to show you exactly what that meant? And I thought, yes, that's absolutely true. So I prepared these 5 points for the Women's Business Network, and I brought them to share with you today. So, number 1, I don't take things personally. I remember the first time that I used this was back when I was a junior in high school. And I was running for president of the school. Now, I was at a 6-year school. I'd been there 5 years. I'd held leadership positions 7th, 8th, 9th, all the way up. I could hang with anybody. I was a crossover student. I could hang with the athletes, the nerds, the drama club, anybody. And everyone knew me because I'd been in front of the school for a long time. So I was pretty confident and I was making my posters and writing my speech. But I hadn't thought about a guy named Fitz Henley running for president. Can you get a little bit of still resentment there inside? Fitz joined at Bishop's junior year, so he was the cool new guy. And he was a handsome kid, charismatic. He could do caricatures in like, like a Disneyland person that does the caricatures of the teachers in like 3 minutes, and everyone loved him. He was so funny. And he decided to run for president because it would be fun. And he ran on the platform of more cookies for all at our milk and cookie break, our daily milk and cookie break. So he won in a landslide victory. I almost voted for him, really, because he was that charismatic. And I found out about my loss about 20 minutes before I had to make a speech for a lesser position for student council the following year. And I decided I had a choice. I could be rightfully pissed off at Fitz and the kids for voting such a goof off into the president position, or I could dig deep, get back up to the mic, and without crying, do a speech for another position. So I did. I made a speech for athletic council president. I hadn't written a speech for athletic council president. And as I stood there at the stage looking out at the students, they will probably forever be my best audience. Big eyes, totally quiet, a little sheepish as they listened. And I realized in that moment as I looked out at them that they didn't mean anything personal to me about this. It was just that Fitz was a cool guy, and they wanted to have a cool guy as a president. So they did elect me, and I was athletic council president the next year, and had a surprisingly fun year. Fitz taught me that you can bring fun into things that are otherwise maybe considered serious. And I've based a couple of my businesses on that concept of bringing fun into serious things. And as my husband of 14 years recently told me he didn't want to be married anymore and he wanted to move out, I was taken back to that time where I'd lost that election. And I was taken into that feeling of disappointment and bewilderment at all of my plans and how they were going astray. And then I remembered those kids. And I realized my husband and I had gone through lots and lots of counseling, and he was unhappy. And this was way less about me than it was about him. Which brings me to my point number 2 that I use. This is my second tool. I drink wine. Right there. I drink wine, and sometimes it's even, unless the DABC is here, I will admit this, bigger than the typical 5-ounce Utah pour. So I'm actually lucky that I've got a business I can write my wine purchases off through. So that's my second tool, is a little wine. Third tool, when I am knee-deep in poop, I use my 33 1/3 rule. So as we go through things in our lives, sometimes our job is just to get through it by lowering our expectations of what we would normally do in any kind of other situation. My family was in a plane crash in 1984. We were leaving San Diego and flying to Durango, Colorado, to do a horse-packing trip. And my dad was the pilot of the small plane, and it was a beautiful August day. And we flew along. We'd passed over the Grand Canyon, and we were about a half hour outside of Durango, and the engine exploded. And as you can imagine, I was dozing. I was immediately awake. My mom and dad were in the front of the plane, and they were trying to figure out exactly where we were. The charts were flying back and forth. My dad's trying to fly the plane as we became a glider instead of a plane. And they're trying to call in, my dad's trying to call in to let the rescue personnel know where we were crashing, what the plane looked like, how many people were in it. The authorities say that after the explosion and down to the crash, we probably had about 3 minutes of time. So my dad, as the pilot, made an interesting choice at that point, is in the air. And apparently pilots can choose this. It's up to them. In this situation, you can either leave that landing gear tucked up into the belly of the plane, or you can put it down. And my dad chose to put it down. We crashed, and unbeknownst to us, it had rained the entire night before our crash. And those wheels and that landing gear acted as a plow that slowed us down as we did this crash landing. And we ended up against a ridge, and we didn't hit it hard enough to kill us. So he had saved our lives by that choice. The Navajo Indians lived in the area. They'd heard the explosion. They came out to find us, and they held flour sacks over our heads for shade because it was midday on an August day in the middle of the desert, very hot. And I found out later that my mom, this is just horrifying. She had laid herself down outside the plane on an ant hill. And of course, no one would move her because they were afraid of injuries. And so she had ants for 2 hours, the time it took the rescue personnel to find us, 2 hours biting at her blood all over her body. That is just horrifying. That getting through that is resilient. So as we were moved from the desert to hospital number 1 to hospital number 2, I realized very quickly that my floodlight of perspective was coming into a laser focus. And I was concerned about my survival and care of my family at that point. And nothing was taking me back into this wide swath. And that is when I first learned that we have to lower our expectations of our behavior and what we're capable of doing in stressful situations like this. I remember when we got home, about 2 months later, I had returned to the house after I had broken my back in the plane crash and I had to have major back surgery. And I was gonna have my first shower. Oh, so excited. So I had this fiberglass cast on. Her name was Heidi. I named her. She was with me for about a year. And I kept her on, but I walked my walker into the bathroom. My mom's in there to help me set up. And I stepped into the tub and had the first water running over me in a lot of months. And it felt so good. And we'd left the shower curtain open because my mom was gonna need to help me. And I remember looking over at my mom, who was using the toilet as a chair, and she was sitting there concentrating with her foot on the ground, and she was using her toes to kind of inch a towel along the ground, like this, because she'd broken her foot in the crash really badly. So this was physical therapy. And I sat there and I realized that we were really proud of ourselves. I'm in the shower and she's doing this little thing with her toes. And I'm thinking, this is a huge win. This is like finishing a marathon. And I thought to myself, my favorite number is 3. So I thought to myself, you know what? 33 1/3 at this point is pretty good performance for us. And you've got to take those expectations and throw them down to whatever your favorite number is, and just be happy with what that little outcome can be for you. So whether you call it 33 1/3, good enough, minimum in, just allow yourself to be okay with performing at a lower level, and you need to be happy with that in those times of stress. Number 4 has 2 parts. A, find a silver lining. Flat tire, maybe by pulling off the road, you avoided an accident up the road. Pesky neighbor, maybe you're learning to set your boundaries. Child with cancer, that is a little bit harder to find. So my son, Mitch Von Puttkammer, grew up here in Park City. He's 25. He went to Park City High, played soccer for them, and also went on to the U and graduated in hospitality. He decided after his graduation that he wanted to go work on his dad's pot farm. Yes, that is husband number one. We're not going to go there today. But he did go out to work on his dad's pot farm. And he was there in California, and he said a thought occurred to him in the shower one day. And he thought, I have never checked myself down there. And he checked himself, and he found a lump, and it was cancer. He came home because we carried his insurance here. He'd caught it very early, and the doctors were very optimistic. The surgery went really well. So maybe you're saying to yourself, well, what a silver lining is that he checked himself in the shower? And I would call that lucky. I would call that divine intervention, inspiration, but I wouldn't call that a silver lining. Silver lining is when you can find something positive within the gloom. So for me, as his mother, that came after he returned from the hospital. So he came back to our house, and there I was, this completely helpless mother, fluffing pillows, putting on aromatherapy spritzers around the room, cooking food, doing whatever I could as a mother to help my son get through this. Finally, he was looking at me, of course, as I was going through all this, and he was angry, he was extremely frustrated, he was confused, and he finally brusquely looked at me and said, Mom, this isn't your story. This is mine. I need space. Bam! I went from helpless mother to adoring fan. My son turned away from his childhood, from letting people take care of him, and turned toward what was to be his manhood and looking forward at what kind of man he was going to be. And he took the reins and ran with it. He studied over the next months of what he was going to be. He didn't just take the autopilot way or what we told him he was supposed to be. He dug in. And I, as his mother, getting to see that moment of boyhood to manhood and then being proud of what I saw, that was my silver lining about this trip with my son. And I certainly did hearken back to coping strategy number 2 back over here. You'll recall the wine part of so I did hearken back to that as he went through this. Part B, if you can't find a silver lining, make one up. So I went through my own cancer, breast cancer, in 2015 and 2016. Many of you have gone through your own cancers or have friends who have gone through cancer, and we all know that the course of treatment is always very individual based on the person and what they're going through. So I went through a double mastectomy, and then I went into radiation. And I found out that radiation is a huge pain in the ass. It is, you have to get yourself to the hospital every day for 6 weeks. And then you get there and you get shown into the dressing room, you undress, you go to another waiting room, the team comes in to get you, you go in, you lay down, you get radiated, you get back in your clothes and you leave. And I realized very quickly that I was going to start resenting having to be there every day, feeling sick and getting burned. So I thought to myself, what can I tie to this hospital visit that is more positive? And I'd always wanted to write a book, but I had a full-time job. I was a mom of 3 kids. I had a husband, a dog, 2 cats. When was I going to find time to write a book? And then I realized that Huntsman has a gorgeous library on the 5th floor. And maybe in 6 weeks, I could have a rough draft of a book by the time I was finished. And I did. And I brought a copy of, and I should say rough. Did I say rough? I said rough, right? Because I brought a copy of that rough draft in, and I had the radiation team sign it. Stacy Demalski, one of my friends, called it my radiation rough draft. And As I put cream on my chest over the next few weeks, I was able to also smile because I had also at the same time advanced one of my biggest life goals. So that creating a silver lining is a big deal. I can go on and on about it. After my husband moved out last year, about this time, I had extra space in my house, so I created an Airbnb. And I got to meet, just 2 weeks ago, a woman named Rosie, who's New Zealand's first and only athlete who is trying to get to Beijing to compete in the first monobob competition, which is, it's a single-man bobsled competition. So I get to meet someone like Rosie, watch for her in the Olympics. When I went through my cancer, I was given beautiful gifts and cards, so I opened a company called Uplift Gift that supports people who may be far away from friends going through challenging times, and they can order gift boxes. When I had my cast on, Heidi, and I went back to college, I remember I would very strategically choose a very handsome guy walking by because I would have to hook an arm because the paths during winter at school were really slippery. So I got to meet a lot of really cool guys. And then I love, last story, I love Halloween. And I'm not a scary Halloween person. I'm like a funny Halloween. I want people to like laugh. And I realized when I was going through my radiation during that 2015, I wasn't going to be able to dress up and make the radiation team laugh because I was going to be in a hospital gown. And then I remembered I had a Sharpie, and I dressed my right breast up as a jack-o'-lantern so that when they opened my gown to do my radiation, they got a good laugh. So I was able to make them laugh about my Halloween costume. So moving on to number 5, that is the last one I'll leave you with, but it's also the first one that I go to when I'm really struggling and smacked down. And that is, I say to myself, I'm in the right place at the right time to learn the right thing. There's also a saying, embrace the suck, and I really take that in and use it. Sometimes we just have to get ourselves through the situation, and we don't know why. I have a stone in my car that has gotten me through a lot, actually, that just reads the word trust. And when I see that, and I'm going through the beginning of something really bad, I realize that number 1, it's happening for a reason, and number 2, I don't need to know what the reason is yet. When my mom was dying at my house this last August, my sisters came to say goodbye, and things deteriorated pretty rapidly. My sisters have never gotten along. I'm the oldest, and I used to have to sit on the hump in the back seat of the car because they would scratch each other. They would fight that badly on family trips. So you have this history of me being the mediator in the family, always trying to explain to one sister why the other sister isn't meaning anything personal, and back and forth. And that's been my place. Self-appointed, but that's been my place. So you overlay our mother dying slowly in the living room in a hospital bed, and none of us is on her best behavior. The fighting started the second day. The pushing and the yelling started the third. By evening of the third day, I had had it. I grabbed my glass of wine and the bottle out of the refrigerator, and I said to them, you can Google, use YouTube, and watch a video on how to change an adult's diaper. I'm out of here. And I went to one of my friends' houses a couple blocks away and spent the night. When I got back the next morning, one sister was packed and she left. The other sister had booked her plane ticket home. And when I dropped my second sister at the airport and I came back to my peaceful, again, house, Mom was resting quietly, and I just sat down in the living room and just closed my eyes. And this beam of light came into my head, and it said, you are released from the middle seat. You no longer have to be the mediator for this family. You are free. And I realized I'd been at the right place at the right time to learn the right thing. And I went up to my mom's bed and I thanked her. And I said, Mom, thank you so much for creating the situation that allowed me to gain this freedom. And then I did add, because I am a sister, I did add, and once you make your transition to angelhood, you're going to have some serious work to do with Sarah and Allison, but I'll leave that up to you from now on. So, in conclusion, if I don't take things personally, I drink wine. I use my rule of 33 1/3. I find a silver lining, or if I can't find a silver lining, I make one up. And fifthly, if the beginning, I say to myself, I'm in the right place at the right time to learn the right thing. I've been able to muddle my way through a lot of challenges in my life. And of course, if all else fails, I grab a glass of wine and turn on Touching the Void. It's the closest any of us will ever get to Joe Simpson. Thank you.